Welcome to the Purple Nation podcast. A podcast reminding us that we live in a diverse nation diverse in faith, diverse in culture, diverse in politics, and diverse in thought. Though we are a diverse nation, we are one nation, not a red nation, not a blue nation, but a purple nation. Hello, Purple Nation. Today we are going to talk about something that has and is dividing our nation, and that's race. We're going to look at how each of the political poles look at race. Now, of course, when I say that, we have to understand that it is a generalization. Of course, everybody on the right doesn't think one way, and everybody on the left doesn't think one way. But in general, this is what you will see from either side in regards to how they think about the issue of race. We're going to talk about critical race theory. We're going to talk about race and policing. And of course, at the end, what we always try to do is we're going to try and find a way to get out of the red and get out of the blue and come together as a purple nation. And I may even have a bonus for you at the end. So let's just jump right into this from the beginning and talk about, in general, how does each side look at race? Now, with people on the right, the big thing about race on the right is that many of the people on the right think that race is a non-issue. We've overcome this big old specter of race, and we need to move on. Now, on the left, there are, or for those who lean more blue, then for them, race is a major issue. It is an issue that is pervasive throughout our society. Race somehow is a part of every issue, every institution. And it has to be found, and like a cancer, it has to be cut out. So let's talk about where each side is right and where they are wrong. Now, in terms of people on the right, reds, and of course, I tend to lean to the right. The big problem that we have on the right is for some, the inability to understand that race is still an issue. Now, the great thing is that one of the main things that people on the right understand is the arc of history. And that is that the arc of history, when it comes to race, has moved steadily in the upward position. There have been dips, yes, all throughout history. There have been times that it has dipped, but the arc of history is going up. Things are better today in America for Blacks and other people of color than they were 30 or 40 years ago. Things 30 or 40 years ago were better for Blacks than they were 30 or 40 years earlier. So that arc of history, and it's had its dips. It's had Jim Crow. It's had lynchings. It's had all of those things, and we're going to address that. But the arc of history is going upward. Where my brothers and sisters who are on the right, that my brothers and sisters who lean red, where they make their mistake is in thinking that because that arc of history has always been going up, that the issue of race is done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's not true. And people who lean right, people who are conservative, people who are reds have to be willing to accept the fact that no, we're not done yet. We still have work to do. Now, that means that my friends on the left, my blues, my liberals, they're right when they say that race is still an issue. The problem is that there's this tendency to see race and to see racism in everything. Anytime there's an interaction between someone who happens to be white and in a position of power and someone who happens to be a person of color, and that doesn't go favorably, then of course it was because the person who was white was racist. That makes no sense. No, that's not the case. Every time that there is an interaction, and we'll talk more about this later, but every time there is an interaction between a police officer who just so happens to be white and a suspect who just so happens to be black, and it ends in violence, it ends in an arrest or even a shooting, does not mean that the officer, by virtue of the fact that they are white, is racist. And what we don't want to do and what needs to happen is in these interactions where the race of the people tend to be different or are different, maybe sometimes we need to just wait and see what happened. Give you an example. There was an incident in Detroit last year. Detroit police pull over a gentleman, and they're in the process of arresting him because he has a warrant. And he has a friend there. The friend there is not who they're concerned with. They're concerned with the gentleman that they're arresting. Well, the friend decides that he's going to pull out a gun and attempt to kill one of the arresting officers. Luckily, for whatever reason, near point blank range, he misses. Well, he gets killed. He was a black man. Of course, everyone in the city is all up in arms. We're going to march. We're going to protest. We're going to tear down the police precinct. Until the body camera information comes out and they realize that this man attempted to shoot and kill an officer at near point blank range. Sometimes the best case scenario is let's wait and see. Let's not just assume bad intent. And one of the things that I try and get my more liberal leaning, my left leaning, my blue leaning friends to understand is you're not helping the cause by assuming that every interaction between people of different races is racist. You're not helping the situation, because actually what you end up doing is you end up making people become tone deaf to those issues that might really be racist. Because they're hearing it over and over again. This is racist, this is racist, this is racist, this is racist. And they're not seeing racism. And so they start to not pay attention at all. And so when something that really is racist comes about, they don't believe it. They're not trying to hear it. A good example, now, those of you who don't have children might not even know this example, but there's this movie that my kids absolutely love. It's called The Incredibles. And in this movie, the main villain is named Syndrome. And what he is trying to do is he's trying to make everyone in the world super. And as he's doing this, he says to the heroes, he says, if I make everyone super, then no one's super. If I make everyone super, no one's super. And it's that way when we start to make everything racist. If everything is racist, nothing. If everything is racist, nothing is racist. And that's the danger that we run into with our friends on the left when they decide that they want to make all of these interactions that are racist. Sometimes it's not racist. And sometimes it's not a racist cop. Sometimes it's just a bad cop. Sometimes it's not a racial issue. It's just an issue where the person who got the short end of the stick happens to be a minority. But we have to make sure that we're not over focusing on race so that when those actual racist incidents happen, people are able to see them and everyone is ready to react to it. That helps us to move into what I believe are two of the main issues that we're looking at when it comes to race. And one is, as I speak to you, school board elections are happening. So one is that it is the issue of CRT, and the other is the issue of police interactions. So we're going to talk about what I want to do. I want to talk about both of those today. Now, the first thing that I want to do before we talk about these issues, I want to play a clip. This is a clip from the TV show The View, and Condoleezza Rice was on the show. And before we get into this, I just want to play what Condoleezza Rice had to say. She got a lot of backlash from some quarters for what she said. And I want to address what she said from the viewpoint of people who lean right and from the viewpoint of this whole CRT issue. So let's listen to what Secretary Rice had to say.
I come out of an academic institution, and this is something that academics debate. What is the role of race and so forth? And let me be very clear. I grew up in segregated Birmingham, Alabama. I couldn't go to a movie theater or to a restaurant with my parents. I went to segregated schools till we moved to Denver. My parents never thought I was going to grow up in a world without prejudice, but they also told me that's somebody else's problem, not yours. You're going to overcome it, and you are going to be anything you want to be. And that's the message that I think we ought to be sending to kids. One of the worries that I have about the way that we're talking about race is that it either seems so big that somehow white people now have to feel guilty for everything that happened in the past. I don't think that's very productive. Or black people have to feel disempowered by race. I would like black kids to be completely empowered, to know that they are beautiful in their blackness, but in order to do that, I don't have to make white kids feel bad for being white. So somehow this is a conversation that has gone in the wrong direction.
So let's address a few things that Dr. Rice had to say there in terms of how we teach this. She said, first of all, there is the danger of teaching race in such a way that it seems so big that white people, white children, remember, in a lot of cases, we're dealing with children here. White children have to feel guilty because of the color of their skin, and black children have to feel that it's so big that they're disempowered. And we don't want, none of us wants that. She talks about wanting black children to feel empowered in their blackness, to understand that they can be empowered within their black skin, and not to make white people feel guilty simply because they're white. And that's the key. not to make them feel guilty simply because they're white. Now, let's talk about what that means. That does not mean that we do not teach all of history, all of American history. We cannot teach American history without teaching that there was legal chattel slavery in which white men owned Black people, and that they treated these Black people as a commodity, as animals. Yes, we have to teach that. Yes, we should teach and must teach about the Black codes and about Jim Crow and about lynching, about how many a family was afraid to allow for their Black men, and in some cases women, but mostly Black men, to leave the house because they might end up dangling from a tree at some point. Yet we have to teach the ugliness of our nation. And when you listen to Dr. Rice, what you have to understand is she isn't saying don't teach that. She's saying teach all of American history. Teach about the great things that we have done as a nation. Teach about the things that we have done that have been positive within the world. Teach about that arc of history that has been in an upward trajectory from the inception of the nation until now. Yet we want to teach about the whole history. And we want white kids to understand that, yes, in some cases, your ancestors owned my ancestors, but we don't hold you guilty for that. Okay? I hope you understand where Dr. Rice was coming from, because a lot of people have misconstrued what she was saying. Well, we don't want white people to feel bad. Well, no, there's going to be some times in history, if you teach history the way that you should, there's going to be times when we all feel bad. There's some things in history, world history or American history, that make me as a Black person, not terribly happy about that. But it's what happened. Same thing with American history for white people. Yeah, no, you might not particularly like that, but it happened. But it's also not your fault. You didn't do it. And that is what Dr. Rice is talking about. And what can we do together, regardless of the color of our skin? We need to be teaching our kids, what can we do together to make sure that we leave a better country for our children than we had? And we need to be working together to do that. Now, what makes certain people on the right feel uncomfortable about CRT is it seems for some, and I would say this is not all, and this is not the majority. First of all, most schools are not teaching CRT. Let's establish that. Most K through 12 schools are not teaching CRT. But even in the way they teach race and history, the concern is that, one, we're going to be focusing on the negative, which we cannot do. We don't want to focus all on the positive, but we want to teach the totality of history. And that there is this desire within some segments of the American society to make white people feel guilty for what happened in the past, to make them feel responsible. We are not responsible for the sins of our fathers. None of us are. On the right, what we have to be willing to do, and especially those of you who are of a fairer skin color, on the right have to be willing to do is understand that if we are going to teach American history, we can't just say we're going to teach the storming of the beaches of Normandy. We're going to just teach the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We're just going to teach the Constitution and all of the great and wonderful things. We have to teach about the dark underbelly of the original sin of this country, which is slavery. And so we need to be careful. We need to make sure that we aren't focusing too much in either direction. We're just teaching truth. And I want to point out that it is possible to teach that truth and to make sure that people of color are empowered. I related so well to Dr. Rice's story because my grandfather was raised in the Jim Crow South. He was born in 1920. He was raised in Georgia. No father figure in the home. And he made something of himself. And I can remember him having a conversation with me. I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. And he said to me, you are going to have to achieve even better than your white counterparts because of the color of your skin. Now, this is early 1980s. But what you will not do, what you will never do, is use the color of your skin as an excuse for failure. And I think that we, as Black people, will do a disservice to our young people if we don't teach them that lesson as well. Teach them about the hardships and the difficulties of our history in this country, but also teach them that you can achieve. We have had great people who have achieved, and do not stand there and use the color of your skin as an excuse for your failure. Keep pushing on. Now, I know that message upsets a few, but in my opinion, it's what we should be doing. It's definitely what I am going to be teaching my 3 boys. Work, strive, be beautiful in your skin. And don't you ever use your skin color as a reason for failure. So let's go from that. Let's move into our next issue here, which is policing. When we look at the issue of policing, again, we have to admit that there are some problems that I believe are systemic within the way certain police forces do policing. But it's also a major difference between urban and rural policing. When I first moved to Kansas, I was a pastor at a very small town in South Central Kansas. Town had 730 people. There were probably more people in the neighborhood that I grew up in than there were in this town. And it was predominantly white. I think maybe if there were a dozen Black people, that would have been a large number in the entire county, not just the town. And I remember the Michael Brown incident happened. And so people came to me and they said, I don't understand. And they legitimately didn't understand because they lived in rural America. They legitimately didn't understand what the issue was. They even said to me, you don't seem to have an issue with law enforcement. You don't seem to fear law enforcement. I said, well, the sheriff lives right around the corner from me. I know the sheriff knows me. Our children play together. If my boys were teenagers and they got stopped by sheriff's deputies here in town for doing something wrong, generally, if it's not something too serious, what's going to happen is they're going to get on the phone, they're going to call me, and they're going to say, hey, your boys did this, come and get them. I explained to them the difference is that, especially in major metropolitan areas and in some rural areas as well, if my boys who are Black are stopped by the police and one of your boys who is white are stopped by the police and they're the exact same age, my son is going to be perceived as a greater threat than your son. My son is going to be perceived as 4 to 5 years older than your son. And that's a problem. That can lead to some very problematic endings. It could also, depending on the situation, lead to maybe even the death of my child. And that's a problem. Now, on the right, now I'm talking to my friends that whom I agree with politically. What you have to understand and admit is that this is true. This is a fact. My son or my sons, when they become teenagers and young Black men, they are going to be perceived as a greater threat than those of you who have children my age and your children are white. Where we have to come together and address this is it's going to take addressing this from two sides. We have to get law enforcement to not have that perception that there's going to have to be some things that happen with training. There'll have to be some things that happen with understanding bias. But on the other side of it, and this is again where someone like me, who's a more conservative Black man, gets in trouble. But okay, on the other side of it, we have to ask ourselves within the Black community, what can we do? What should we do to help to change that perception? What is it that we may do within our communities and within our culture that might help to foster that perception? And how can we help to change it? There is a role for us in this as well. So what's the Purple Nation part of all of this? How do we come together? Well, first of all, we admit where we're wrong. We admit on the right that, yes, although we've come a long way on race, there's still things that have to be done. We admit on the left that every issue, every interaction is not race-based. We agree that, excuse me, we agree that we need to teach our history, and we need to teach it in its totality, the good and the bad. But in teaching our history, it is not necessary, and we are not trying to make white people feel guilty simply because of the color of their skin. And we are not attempting to disempower Black people and make them think that they cannot achieve because of the color of their skin. They are empowered. We admit that there are some systemic issues in the way that policing is done, and that Black men in particular, but also Black women, are perceived as a greater threat in law enforcement stops. But we also Study those reasons why. And for those of us who are Black, look within our culture and see what are some things that we can do to help to change that perception, along with law enforcement going through changing the way that they do law enforcement and changing the way that they are perceiving those who they stop, understanding that just because of the color of my skin does not mean that I am a danger to you. And if we do this, we can come closer to achieving the great promise of this nation. We have come a long way to achieving those words that were written that say that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The arc of history started out with that only being white land-owning men, and then women, and then all people. We still have a long way to go, but we have come a mighty long way, and we need to admit that. We need to be proud of the achievements that we have made so far, but we also need to be willing to accept the fact that there are still a lot of things that we have left to do. That's how we come together. That's how we join, regardless of whether we are conservative or liberal, regardless of whether we lean right or left, regardless of whether we are red or blue. That is what will allow for us to become that one nation, a nation that is diverse in politics, diverse in religion, diverse in thought, but a nation that is not a red nation, not a blue nation, but a purple nation. With that, my friends, I also want to invite you, I am giving you a bonus this time around. In addition to this podcast, I will be posting a sermon that I preached shortly after the murder of George Floyd that talked about bringing people together, specifically within the church. I'm going to post that as a separate podcast with this podcast, but I'm going to post it separately so that you might be able to listen to it. Once again, let us endeavor, my friends, to be not a red nation, not a blue nation, but a purple nation.